Hilchas Keilim Peirik Tishaser. Now we learned that a shever, a klicheres, shivri klicheres is mekabel tumas. It's a special limud from called klicheres, rabbi shivri klicheres. But on the condition that it's still a makabel. Mashenkin, if it's not a makabel, so then it's not makabel tumah. But yeah, other kelim. So if it's doing still me'en malachta and rishena, only then is a makabel tumah. Mashenkin a klicheres, even if it's not me'en malachta and rishena, but as long as it's a makabel, it's makabel tumah. Now here, the Rambam is saying, when you get the shear of what size of a hole does a klicheres have that is considered no longer a makabel, and therefore it's not makabel tumah. Perik tishaser, kama shear hashever, she yishaver klicheres, v'yitar mitumasi im hoyitame, ele yikabel tumah im hoyitor. So it lashon shever, but it means a hole. What's the size of the hole of the keli to make the keli uis tame, or if it was tor, to make it not roy lekabel tumah? Now, if this keli was osil eichlin, so then it's mishiyanakiv b'meitzi zaysim. If the hole is the size that a zayis could fall out, so then it's not mekabel tumah. If a osil mashkin, so then mishiyanakiv machnis mashkin. So even though it's osil mashkin, and lepel it has a hole and mashkin is dripping out of it, but it's still a din keli, even though mashka is falling out. As long as it's not such a big hole that mashka will come in. Mishiyinokiv machnus mashkin. The says kshemanich and esay ala mashke yikonis hamashke lekeli benekev. So then, if it has such a hole, a osila mashke, that mashke will come in, so then it's no longer a keli. But as long as it doesn't have such a hole, it's still a keli. Now ha'osi lekachu lekach, saifa mashke and saifa eichlin is matin le'esil lechumri v'aliyom mekabel tumah ad sheyinokiv meitzizayis. So knows einachinami lemashke wouldn't have a din of a keli, because it's machnes mashka, but lapel, since it's also asula echlin, so it still has the din of a keli, because it's asula echlin, until it has a hole, which is meitzi zayis. Now, v'li omru b'meitzi mashka, when is there a din of meitzi mashka? It should take an uis keli, ella begistra bilvad. A gistra, as we learned, a gistra is something that was used like as a tats, under another keli, that whatever drips out of the other keli should fall into this keli. So the whole purpose of the gistra is in order to contain, notice that the water shouldn't drip out, and therefore it should fall into the gistra. Masha'inkin, if this gistra has a hole, which is meitzi mashkas, so therefore there's no point in the gistra. There's a regular keli has a function, you drink in the keli, you use the keli. So einachinami, some water is dripping out, but nevertheless it's still a usable keli as long as it doesn't have a hole, which is machnas mashka. Mashengen a gistra, the whole purpose of the keli is in order for the water not to drip out. So if you have a hole which is b'meitzi mashka, so there's no function of a gistra. V'liyomru b'meitzi mashkin ela b'gistra b'lvad l'fishi asuya l'kabel ha'mashkin ha'nezim and ha'kelim. The whole point of the gistra is only to be mekabel the mashkin which is nezim and ha'kelim, and memele v'meitzi ha'mashkin, if it's being meitzi mashka, it is a bottle tashmisha. So the whole purpose is bottle, so therefore it doesn't have a din of a kelim. Chomish midas b'klicheres. In the klicheres, when you want to reckon whether or not it has a din of a keli, there's five sizes. There's five dinim. Now nika b'meitzi mashka, which is the smallest hole, it was nika b'meitzi mashka, because any little hole will already be meitzi the mashka. So it's term l'star mishtum gistra, like we just learned. That if it was a gistra and it's becoming tummy because it has a din of a gistra, but if it has a hole which is kemeitzi mashka, so it can't become Tommy als gistra, so mele it's term will istam mishum gistra. Aber vadayin uchoshev keli lekadish b'meichatas. The din is that kiddush meichatas has to be done to pour the ephor par aduma. Put the ephor par aduma onto mayim chayim has to be done in a keli. So even though this keli is moitzi mashke, but it still has a din keli that you could be mekadish in this keli meichatas. Adayin uchoshev keli lekadish meichatas. Now nikav kekenis mashke. If it was nikav already kekenis mashke, so then eine roy lekadish b'meichatas. It's already becomes uis keli legabe the din of meichatas. Aber vadayin keli hu choshev lahakshir hazroim b'mashkin atlushin be'kmesha b'yarnu. The din is that in order for oichel to become mukshel lekabel tumah, it has to come into contact with water. Now, what kind of water? It has to be water which is not attached to the ground. Water which is attached to the ground, and the oichel became wet from that water which is attached to the ground, and it's still attached to the ground. So then that's not going to become a kabel tumah. That oichel doesn't become mukshel kabel tumah. Now what happens if it's in a keli, which it's so obvious if it's in a keli, so it's a keli, so it's not attached to the ground. So then it's makabel tumah. It becomes muksher if it touches water in a keli. So then it becomes muksha lekabel tumah. Now what happens if this keli has a hole? You have a keli on the floor, and the keli has a hole. So if that keli has only a hole, which is roy lahachnas mashka, that's not a big enough hole to make it uis keli, and to say that it's not in a keli and therefore it's on the ground. When the water is on the ground, so then it's not machshel kabel tuma. When it's in a keli, it is machshel kabel tuma. So if it's in a keli, even though this keli has a hole which is machnas mashka, it's still considered that it's in a keli and it's not on the ground. It's not on the ground. However, if this keli has a hole which is kedei neck of cotton, kedei sherish cotton, which means that a sherish, a little root that'll be growing out of this otzis, for example, or out of this keli, would be able to go through that hole. So then the water which is in that keli is considered the water which is on the ground, and therefore that water is not machshel lekabel tumah. That's what he's saying, nachamo. V'adayin keli, who even though it has a hole which is lahachnas mashka, but with machnas mashka, but it's still called a keli, it's considered a adayin keli hu chashuv, lahachshir hazroim b'mashkenat lushin bei. That water which are in this keli is considered mashkin, which are talush from the ground, and therefore they're machshel lekabel tumah. However, nikav k'shedish cotton, if it became a hole which is the size of a shedish cotton, which is larger than the hole which is machnas mashka, so then ein amayim shebetechi machshirnas hazroim. And v'harein ki mishe'enim bekeli. So if you have water in that keli, so that water is considered attached to the ground, and therefore that water wouldn't be makshir oichel to be makabel tumah. Aber v'adayin keli hu choshev the kabel beizeisim. If it would be a keli which is osi lekabel eichlim, so it's considered a keli. It could be makabel tumah. It'll be makabel tumah because it's a keli which is roy leoichlim. It could be makabel zeisim or makabel tumah. However, nikav b'meitzi zeisim. So then it's tor. So then it's tor because, as we said before, that a keli which is made for eichlin. So once it was nikav b'meitzi zeisim, it's tor. Vareo kegliglolim va'avonim she'ena makabel tumah. So it's not makabel tumah. But v'adayin keli hu chashuv, it's still considered a keli lahatzel b'tzomet pasel. Whereas the din is that if you have a kli cheres, and that kli cheres has a tzomet pasel olav, so then that keli is matzel be'elames. Be'elames, and we learned before that tzomet pasel is also matzel b'kli cheres. So there's a musel of matzel b'kli cheres. Now, if that keli, which has a tzomet pasel, already is, so in order for the keli to matzel b'tzomet pasel, it has to have a din keli. So I'm saying, even though this keli really is not makabel tumah, because lepel, this keli has a hole which is not, which has a hole the size of meitzi zeisim, so therefore it's not makabel tumah, but still it's considered a keli that it could be matzel be'elames. It could be matzel b'tzomet pasel ad she yipachas rubi, until it was yipachas rubi, and it has to be the size of a riming. In other words, if it's this, in other words, it has to be the size of a riming. In other words, if the marshal rube is less than the size of a riming, so that's not enough. It has to be either the size of a riming, the minimal, and if rube is more than a riming, so it has to be yipachas rube. That's what we learned before in Tumas Mes. But al kopar v'adayin keli uchashiv, this keli, in other words, you have a keli which has a hole which is kedei leheitzi zeisim, and therefore it's not royal lekabel tumah because lepel it has a hole. But nevertheless, it has a din keli that if there's a tzomet pasel on it, and also on that hole, so then what's inside that keli won't be makabel tumah, unless the Ram says over here it's yipachas that yipachas rubei, and also as we're saying that it has to be at least kemetzi rimin k'mishabiyarnu betumas mes. So it comes out of maskana that there's 5 shiurim, 5. That's we said chamish midas b'klicheres. There is moitzi mashka, and then there's machnas mashka, and then there's kisherish cotton. And then there's Moitzi Zeisim, and then there's Yipachas Rube. As we said before, Yipachas Rube, but that has to be at least Kemetzi Rimin. And then it's not even a Keli to be able to be Matzel in a Tzomet Posel. Halacha Gimel, Hechavis Shiura Ke'egezim. So a Chavis is miyuchid for gregers and a gezim. That's what a Chavis barrel is normally, you stored dried figs in it, and also a gezim. Now they're larger than Zeisim. So even though normally we say that a miyuchid la'echlim shiura kezesim, but a chavis, since it's miyuchid for gregers and egezim, so therefore the shear is the shear of an egez, which is larger than the shear of a zayis. Now ha'ilfis v'ha'kedera, which are also things that are used for food and also for mashka. We said before you go to chumrah, and therefore the shear is like for food, and therefore shiura is kezesim. V'chein areva shel cheres is sheyurach b'zeisim. If you have a large bowl of cheres, the shir is b'zeisim. Afilo oisa gedela u'marzek is arboim so belach. In other words, it's a very large bowl, and it could be marzik arboim so and v'nivcha so b'meitzi zeisim. It has a hole the size of a meitzi zayis. Is afal pishu matal tzida v'loshba. Really, this bowl you could knead in the bowl. Because lapel, if you'll not move it over on its side, you could still knead in it. But once it has a hole, which is kemetzi zeisim, and that's not the normal thing to turn it over and be loshba. You could, but that's not the normal thing. So therefore, it's considered that it's a keli, which is no longer mekabel. It's asuya la'echlin, and it has a hole kemetzi zeisim, so it's not considered any longer a mekabel, and therefore it's no longer mekabel tumah. It wasn't made in order to be bent over and to be makabel and to be loshba. So no, if you have a broken piece of a keli, so now a broken piece of a keli, you're done whether or not it's a makabel. So there's a din, a broken piece of a keli is a makabel. Masha'inkin, this areva is not broken. It's in its matzav the way it is right now, and it has a hole, kemetzi zayis, so meitzi zaysim come out of it, and it's not made in order to be turned over and be loshba, so therefore, it's not considered a keli. You have to explain a little bit that on one end we say if it breaks off and it's royal lekabel, it's still considered a keli. Masha'inkin over here didn't break off; it's in its original state. But l'chula is royal lekabel if you turn it over. But since it's not made in order to be turned over, so therefore it's not considered a keli, and memela it's Torah. Halacha dalet hapach ba'ateni, which are little jars which you use in order to put oil in it, is shiura b'shemen. So the shir is b'shemen, which means that we said before that something which is asuy lemashkin is, in order to become ois keli, it's kemachnis mashke. So here, machnis mashke means machnis mashke shemen. In other words, if you sit it down on shemen, how big of a hole does it have to be in order for the shemen to go up into the hole? And tzartzur is something, also a type of a keli, which is used with water. So therefore, shiur b'mayim. So in other words, depending on what kind of mashke it's being used with, so when you want to establish whether or not it has the shear of kimachnis mashke, it has to be the mashke which is normally used with. Now, some people write that mayim, knows mayim, since shemen is thicker, so therefore you'd need a larger hole to get shemen to be machnis shemen rather than mayim to be machnis mayim, because since mayim is it doesn't have that thickness to it, so therefore it'll be machnis mayim easier, even on a smaller hole. But the Rishonim says differently. The Rishonim say clearly that fakert, that by shemen, since Vaisu shemen is like, it has that shem fafea bekule, so therefore shemen you'll be able to be machnis mashke by shemen in a smaller hole than by mayim, where mayim doesn't have that qualities of shemen which goes and like we learned before, the bear, it slips easier. So Vaisus, it slips up also easier. So shemen will go up easier in a smaller hole than mayim. Halacha hey. Ner shenitel piv. You have a ner. A ner is a keli, a receptacle, which you put the oil in and you put the wick in it. But the wick goes through the mouth of the ner. So there's like on the side of the ner, there's like a little mouth sticking out from the ner. And that's where you put the wick. And now lapel, that pea of the ner was taken. So really, even though be'etzim the ner is still a receptacle, but it's not really usable. It's not usable as a ner. A ner is only usable if you could put over there the wick. So therefore it's Torah. That's din number one. And din number two, v'shel adama shehusek pif b'psila. We learned that in order for a klicheres to have a din of a klicheres, it has to be that it was in the kill, it was in the furnace, and only then does it become a klicheres. That was one din we learned. Then we also learned that a tanner and a kira, even though they weren't in a furnace, but since they were heated up as the tanner in order to be able to bake suvginin, or a kira was heated up enough to be able to fry on top of it an egg, a scrambled egg. So that's also enough, that heat is considered enough to finish off the kira and the tanner. Now there would be a svara that a ner also, if you light the candle, so that would be enough to finish off the ner, to make the ner from a ner shel adama to become a din of a ner shel cheres. A ner shel adama is not makabel tumah. Only cheres is makabel tumah. So he's saying, v'shel adama, if you have a ner shel adama, shehusak piv bepsila, that the piv was heated with a psila. So the question is that enough to make the ner into a cheres? this Adam into Acheres. So the din is Eini Mekabel Tumah. It's not Mekabel Tumah, Ve'eini Beklal Klicheres. Ad Sheyusa Kulei Bekivshon Kiklicheres. The entire Keli. It's not enough that the piv is going to be have the psila, because that's not going to really extend. The heat is not going to extend to the entire keli. It'll only be on the piv. So therefore, Eini Bechlal Klicheres Ad Sheyusa Kulei Bekivshon Kiklicheres. The entire nair, the side, the receptacle part of the nair, inside the pi of the nair should be go into a kivshon, and over there become a klicheres. Halacha vov, chavis shen nifchaso. You have a barrel that nifchaso, which means the bottom of it is broken off, and therefore this barrel is no longer a receptacle. In other words, the things will fall out of the barrel. However, kshemat noisa al dofna, if you put it on its side, in other words, when it's standing upright, so everything will fall out. Mashenkin, if you put it on its side, is mikabelis, then it could be mikabel. That's one option. Oi, another situation, shenechleka, kimin shtei arevis. You know, you had a barrel, which was a full barrel, and now it was split into half, and it's like you have two bowls. You made from a barrel 2 bowls. So the din is hadayin hi mikabelis tuma. In such a case, it's makabel tuma, because it has a din of the shivri klicheres. Just like we learned before that shivri klicheres is makabel tuma. So over here also, this has a din of shivri klicheres, and therefore it's makabel tumah, which is different. We learned before the areva shel cheres that has this hole in, and if you could turn it over, so then it's not makabel tumah. That's what we learned in halach gimel, because that's not shemit chilas elinasis lekach. And over here we're saying, again, you have to understand the difference. Over here we're saying that when you have a chavis, and that chavis is nifchaso, so in the present state it's not really l'chura roy lekabel the way it normally stands. But nevertheless, it's right that you should turn it over and be makabel. So that's considered adayin makabelas tuma. Now nisra, if the chavis became like, shattered, it's not completely broken apart, but they became like split. There has a lot of cracks in it. Ve'eni yechelu lehitaltol b'chatzi kav gregers. You cannot go ahead and move this chavis if the chavis is containing a kav greger. So in other words, it's very, very fragile. This chavis is very, very fragile. So then it's tater, because then it's really not usable. Halacha zayin. Chavis shenitlu ozneh. The ozneh is like the handles that you would carry the chavis with. So you had a chavis which had handles, and now those oznayin were taken. It's hareyaki gistra. Since it's already like a broken chavis because it's missing the handles, so therefore it has a din of a gistra, which a gistra has different dinim, like we learned before, that if a gistra has kemoitzi mashke, so it becomes already uis mekabel tuma, because a gistra, even a moitzi mashke, is already enough to take it away from din tuma. Then afilo ezen achas, even if one handle, it had 2 handles, and it was one handle, so again, you can't carry it, so you can't use it as it was originally intended to use, which is to be able to move it with its handles. Now, nizdeko lematem ozneh, it was cracked under its handles. So in Mele, if you're going to start picking it up with the handles, so it's going to completely fall off. Even though the handles are still there, is nevertheless a rezu gistra, because even though the handles weren't taken off yet, but lapel, if you're going to start moving it, so presumably it'll very soon fall off because it's cracked. So Mele, the whole top part with the handle will come off, and you won't be able to move the chavis. So it has already a din as if it was taken off. Now, if you made this chavis or chatchila without handles, is nindenis kechavis. It has a regular din of a chavis. In other words, a chavis doesn't have to have handles. But if lapel, the chavis, has handles, so then the din is that if it's missing the handles, it has a din of a gistra. Halacha ches, chavis shenizdeka b'kivshon. You have in the kivshon, where they're making the chavis and they're heating them, so over there you have a cracked chavis. V'nimtza shehi kishtei gistrois, so they look like 2 gistrois. They have 2 halves of the chavis. So the question is, when were they cracked? If they were originally nigmar malachta, in other words, they were a complete chavis, and then they were cracked, is called gistra mem mekabels tumah. So they have a din of a regular gistra. In other words, originally was a keli, now you have a part of a keli, so it has a din of a gistra. However, if it cracked before it was tigam malachta, v'achar nisrafa b'kivshin, and only then was it heated up in this furnace? Is teira, because in other words, a keli was never made as a gistra. The whole gather of a gistra, the pshat is it was originally a keli, and now it was taken away from a keli. So even though it's no longer its original keli, but it still has a din of a gistra. But you don't make lechatchila a gistra. So mainly, if this keli was cracked after it was a keli, so then each side is called a gistra. It was like a regular din. You have a keli and then it becomes a gistra. Mashenga was cracked before it became a keli, so basically there was never a keli yet to become a gistra from, and therefore it doesn't have a din of tumah, and therefore it's stayr, because it knows you don't make gistras. How do you know when it was cracked? If it was cracked before it was heated up, it was cracked after it was heated up. So in other words, you could see that it's pretty much exactly the same halves, two halves, equal halves, and also the inside of the equal, knows where the two halves touch each other, also you see they became red, which means that they were heated up, that inside was also heated up. So that's an indication that actually nigmar malach and nizdaka. So then it's obvious that it must have been cracked earlier, because that's why it was able to be cracked exactly, pretty much exactly in half. And also that the inside, where the place of the crack, the inside where one crack would touch the other crack, was also heated up, became maidim, because it was really exposed to the heat, just like the outside of the chavis was exposed to these. However, ein shvoreh shavim, the halves aren't equal, because they broke after they were already a complete chavis, and also the ein teicha maidim, and those two halves, when they meet each other, the inside of it is not really finished off. In other words, you can see that they weren't exposed to the fire. Is biyodua she'achar shenigmar malachta nishbara, so it was obviously broken after nishbara malachta, and therefore mekabel es tumah kishar shivri kli cheres haruyin l'tashma. So the nekudas advarim is if you had a keli and that keli broke and it has a din of a gistra, so that's fine. That's become mekabel tumah. If it broke before it became a din keli, so there's no din of a gistra. And also, how do you know if it broke before or afterwards? We see if it's equal parts, and it's also, you can see that the inside is also red, which means the inside where the cracks touch each other, so then you know that it must have broken before it was a keli, and mele is not makabel tumah. Halacha tes, gistera shenisra. You have a gistera, became also shvach, or let's say cracked, and memele ve'ena mekabel is mashkin, and it can't be mekabel mashkin anymore. Aval bishem mekabel is echel. You can put food into it, but you can't put any drinks into it. Is arezu tehera. Why? Sheina suya elil kabel mashkin adelf. And the whole purpose of a gistera is in order that if when you have another keli which has mashke, and those mashke are dripping, so this should be mekabel that mashke. Kamei should be anu. The moisa delefes. And if it was delefes, is any gistra distra. If this gistra alone is dripping, so you're not going to go ahead and put another gistra to collect the mashke from this gistra. V'chein gistra shenifchasa ishenechleka l'shnayim. You have a gistra which also got broken, or it was divided in half, and maybe each half could also be used as a gistra. Just like we said before, you have a keilim, or you have a chavis, and that chavis was divided in half, so each side could be still used as a gistra. So now if you have, let's say, a large gistra, and now you divided this gistra was broken into half, so maybe each half of this gistra could be used as another gistra. So we say, no, that's tehera. Why? Shali omru shirayim shel shirayim mistam. We don't say shirayim shel shirayim. In other words, gistra is a shirayim of a keli. So there was originally a keli, now it's only roy li as gistra, so it's makabel tumah. But something was originally only a gistra, and now you're going to say shirayim shel shirayim, so that doesn't work. El shiore kliches bulvad hein shemistamen, but not shiore gistra. Halacha yud. Gistra shechidudin yetzim mimena. Chidudin means there's like a bubble coming out of the gistra. So you have this gistra, and there's an extension of bubble coming out of the gistra, which is also a makabel. It's not mamish part of the keli. It's like a bubble extending from the wall of the keli. Now the question is this bubble considered really part of the gistra? So gistra shechidudin yetzim mimena. Ben shoy yisheves, ben shoy semut al tzidr. Regardless if this gistra is being makabel tumah because it's makabel while it's standing upright up. Knows upright, and knows part of the keli was broken off on the top, and therefore the rest of it is called a gistra. Or like we had the story with the chavis, which was split in half. Therefore, you have to turn it on its side to be makabel, and it's makabel. So either way, but lapel there's a chidudin which is coming out of the gistra. So it depends. Kol makabel min achidudim zeisim k'shi yismali agistra zeisim. And knows if this chidudim is big enough that when you're going to fill up the gistra with zeisim, there'll be zeisim also going into these chidudim. So then it's mitami b'maga, or connecting mitami b'aver. So then it can be mitami side b'maga, and also connected the walls of the chidudim ikrosim mistame ba'aver. V'chol she'ein mekabel ima b'zeisim, but lepel if it's not mekabel zeisim together with the gistera, so then it's mistame b'maga. It could be mekabel tumah b'maga ve'ein kinegdi mistame ba'aver. So again, we have these chidudim which is going out of the gistera. The question is if the chidudim becomes tummy. So we say it depends. If it's these chidudim are mekabel zeisim, in other words, when you fill up the gistra with zeisim, the zeisim go also into these chidudim, so then it's mekabel side imitami side b'maga and side b'aver. Masha'in kein, if it's not mekabel zeisim, so then it's mistame b'maga and be'ein mistame kinegdi mistame b'aver. Now what does that mean? So the Rambam teaches us. Kate said mistame b'maga. What does it mean mistame b'maga be'ein kinegdi mistame b'aver? Shemnoga hatuma b'gistra mitecha. So then, mistame achidut. The chidut can become tummy only if the person touched, if something tummy touched the gistra miteche. However, nichnas atuma ba'aver agistra, and afilo hoisa keneged achidut, even if it was in the aver agistra, which is keneged achidut, is lei nitma achidut. So in other words, a tumas aver is not going to cause that the chidut should become tummy. A gistra becomes tummy with tumas aver. Question is the chidud going to become also tamei when the gister becomes tamei with tumas aver? Say no. If the gister becomes tamei with tumas maga, so then the chidud will become tamei together with the gister. Masha'inkin, if the gister is going to become tamei with tumas aver, so then the gister is not going to become tamei together with the chidud is not going to become tamei connected together with the gister. Now from Lashon Rambam is mashma that even betumas maga, it could only be tumas maga when it touches the inside of the gistera. And then when it touches the inside of the gistera, so then the chidud becomes tummy together with the gistera. Masha'inkin, if it touches the inside of the chidud, in this case, if it would touch the inside of the chidud, it wouldn't become tummy, because really the chidud is not really part of the gistera. It's only a din derabanan. Therefore we're saying that if you touch the gistera betumas maga, so it's also metame the chidud. Masha'inkin, if there's only tumas aver, so then the chidud doesn't become tummy. Now v'keitzad halacha yud beis v'keitzad kinegdim mistame ba'aver. When do we say that it does become mistame ba'aver? We said if it's mekabel zeisim is kinegdim mistame ba'aver. Shem hoisa tumah ba'aver agistera kineged achidud. If it was betuma of the aver agistera which was kineged hachidud, so then is nitmad hachidud im hagistera. I'm not 100% sure. What does it mean? Haisa tumah ba'aver hagistera kineged hachidud. L'chur, it means that the aver was taker, and the tumah was in the chidud. It was in the aver hachidud. It was ba'aver hagistera. What's like ba'aver hagistera? Ba'aver hagistera kineged hachidud. In other words, we're considering the chidud an extension of the gistera. So therefore, since the chidud is an extension of the gistera, so saying ba'aver, it was ba'aver hagistera. How was it ba'aver hagistera? Kineged hachidud. So then is nitma chidud im hagistera. So if it's, in other words, if it is mekabel ba'aver, so the aver could be in the gistera. So in other words, I'm sorry, it could be in the chidud. You know, you have something tummy in the aver which is keneged achidud, so then the whole gistera becomes tummy, because lepel, this chidud is considered part of the gistera. Masha'inkin, if we're talking about that it's not mekabel zeisim, so really it's not part of the gistera. So the only way it can become tummy if it will be mekabel tumah b'maga in the gistera, not in the chidud. Mekabel tumah in the gistera, so then the chidud will also become tummy. So we say mistame b'maga connect the b'aver, or ain't mistame connect the b'aver. So what does that mean? So that's the question. The question is it only become tumah if you touch the inside? If you touch the inside, or it's also tumah if there's only tumah in the aver of the inside. V'chein kol tumas maga hamura b'inyan klicheres etane v'kirayim. Who? What does it mean tumas maga? Shetiga hatumah mehem miteichon. That the tumah actually touched the klicheres miteichon. That it has to touch it miteichon, but normally it doesn't have to actually touch it miteichon. It's enough that it's in the aver miteichon. Masha'inkin, when you say no, it's only mistambe b'maga, means it has to touch it miteichon. V'chol tumas aver hu shleitiga tumah klal el tikonis la'aver bulvat. So that's the issue. The issue is, does it have to become tamei through maga, or does it have to be miteichon through maga, or is enough miteichon through aver? So that's what we're saying, that in order to be matame this this chidudim. So it depends. If the chidudim are really considered part of this gistra because it's mekabel zeisim, so then when the gistra is mekabel tume ba'aver, or even l'chure the mokma chidudim is mekabel ba'aver, so everything becomes tummy. Everything becomes tummy. Masha'in kein, in order for the chidudim, masha'in kein, in order for, in a case where the chidudim are not mekabel zeisim, so in order for the chidudim to become tummy, it's only if the tumah touched b'maga into the inside of the gistra, so then the chidudim also becomes tummy. Halacha Yud Gimel, chavish nisra. You have a chavish which became weak, it's cracked and it's about to break. V'taflu biglolim. You went ahead and you smeared on it golol, dung, and through that you're being mechazik it. Is afal pishu neitlas aglolim v'acharosim neiflim. Because really this whole chavish will fall apart unless it has this golol which is stuck to it in order to hold it tight. But nevertheless, harezu mekabel tumah. It's mekabel tumah. Why? Mipnei shelibatul sham keli olah. No, chavis was a keli, and the fact that you're using even golol, which is not really mekabel tumah, klei glolim aren't mekabel tumah, but you're using klei glolim in order to preserve a kli cheres. So therefore, but lepel it's a kli cheres, and therefore it's mekabel tumah. That's talking about if the chavis was only nisra, it was only cracked, and there was cracks, but lepel it was still complete. However, nishbara, if this chavis was broken, and then v'davik chorsa achar shepirshu, and then you put together the charasim after they fell apart, eishahevi charasim mokim acher v'tafim b'glolim, or you brought a bunch of pieces of charasim and you put it together with glolim, and it's brought down to lav dafke glolim, even tit mamish, because tit is like from clay and could also be mekabel tumah. But afal pisha neitlas aglolim b'charasim eimdim, even though you put it together so well. So now, lepel, you don't need the golol in order to keep it together. But nevertheless, it's Torah. Why? Once this chavis fell apart, so it's no longer a keli. And the fact that you put it together without burning it in a kivshan is not considered a keli. So the fact that right now it stayed together, even without the golol, doesn't make a difference. Because lepel, since it became uis keli, and it never became again a keli through burning it in a kivshan, so mele, it doesn't have a din of a keli. Now, this case, the second case, where it fell apart, and then you put it together, but lepel, amongst those parts, there was a cheres which was machzik revius, and that cheres was royal lekabel tumah. So the din is keneged oisi acheres bilvad, keneged that cheres of this new keli, and as you took the keli and you put it together, and there's the part which is that cheres, so keneged oisi acheres bilvad is mustami ba'aver. So it would be mustami ba'aver neishu keli b'finansmi as a din of a keli. The fact that it was broken doesn't make it always keli, because since it's royal lekabel revius, it's still a keli. That was we learned shivri kli cheres. If it's royal lekabel, it's still a keli. Ush'ara chavis. Now you went ahead and took this piece which is royal lekabel revius, which really could be mekabel tumah, and you connected it with other broken pieces of the chavis which aren't able to be mekabel tumah. Ush'ara chavis einim stami. They wouldn't become tummy, like we said before. Before we said without this piece of bechlal, nothing would become tummy. But now with this piece, so this piece becomes tummy ba'aver. Ush'ara chavis einim stamer at shetiga ba'at tumah mitecha, unless the tumah will touch mitecha of this piece. Not of the other pieces, if it will touch it, it won't become tumah. Similar to what we learned before b'negeh the chidudim, that the tumah has to touch, in other words, when the chidudim are only being mekabel tumah through maga, the maga has to be in the gister and not in the chidudim. So over here also, when these pieces are being mekabel tumah through maga, but they're being mekabel tumah through the maga in that part of the cheres which was able to be mekabel revius. Mipnei shu keli b'fnei atzmei. Ush'ara chavis einim stami at shetiga bo atumah mitecha, until the tumah will touch mitecha of this piece of the cheres which is mekabel revius, mipnei she'ein a kli shalom, because it's not a kli shalom. So therefore, it can't really be mekabel tumah unless through via this other piece, and this mekabel tumah is being bottled to that other piece. Halacha Yudalit. Chavis shenikva. You have a chavis of cheres that it had a hole, and then you went ahead v'sosam hanekev b'zefes. You were soisim the nekev, and v'achar kach nishbara, and then this chavis got broken. Now lepel im yesh b'cheres hasosam b'zefes. Kidei lahachzik revius harizim mekabel tumah mipnei shu mishivri hachavis and v'li bottle sham Keilim yolah. So even though the lepel had a hole And mitzad that hole, it wouldn't have been makabel tumah. And if it was tummy, it would become tor. But lepel, it didn't become uis keli. It's still a keli. Then when you went ahead and closed that hole with zephys, so now it's back into a regular klicheres. Since if it was tummy before, so now it's not going to be tummy. But lepel, right from here onwards, since the zephys is a good steamer for a regular chavis, so therefore you have a regular klicheres. And now when you have go ahead and you have, let's say this klicheres breaks, and now what's left is a part of this klicheres, which is makabel or revius, but that part has this hole which has the zephys on it, there's no problem. Because lepel, it was a regular klicheres. The taka had a hole in it, but it was corrected with a zephys. Now it's like just like regular chavis that broke, and memela, if it's makabel or revius, it's makabel tumah. As opposed to if it first broke with the hole, and then you put the zephys on, then that's not going to help. That's this halach and halach yudal. Let's start again at the beginning. Yudal. Chavis shenikfa. You have a chavis which has a hole, and then v'sasam hanegav b'zephys. You close the hole with pitch, with tar. V'achar kach nishbura, and then the keli got broken. Is im yesh b'cheres hasosum b'zephys kidei lahachzik revius. If that part of this cheres hasosum b'zephys, this kidei lahachzik revius, is arezim mekabel tumah. So this shever keli, which consists of the hole and the sosum b'zephys, is mekabel tumah mipnei shum yishivri achavis. It's a broken chavis, and v'libotul shem kelim yoleh. Never lost its shem keli. It's always a keli, and since it was stuffed with zephys, so it's a regular keli. It's a regular kli cheres. Aval cheres shenikav achish pirish min keli. It was like this. You had a keli that was a kli cheres, and then it got broken, and then there was nikiv achish pirish min keli, and then v'sosam hanekav b'zephys, and then you went ahead and stuffed this nekav b'zephys. Is aval be right now is umachzik revius. Is Torah. Why? Shacheres shenikav, since it had a hole in it, idach batul shem kelim yolav. So it didn't have really a shem keli. In other words, this piece of cheres, this broken piece of cheres that fell off the chavis, and that broken piece of cheres had a hole. So that broken piece of cheres didn't have a din of a keli. And memela v'tor, so it became Torah. V'chol shetor b'kli cheres sho'achas and litum lo'ilam. It's not going to become tummy. It's not going to become tummy by closing it into the zephys. So in other words, when you have the kli cheres, you have the chavis, so that chavis, even with a hole, has a din of a keli. And then when you went ahead and stuffed it with zephys, it has a din as if it never had a hole. As if it never had a hole. And therefore now when it broke off, and part of the part is the part that had the hole, and now it's the zephys, and it's makabel a revius, so it's makabel tumah. Mashenk in the case where you had a broken piece of cheres, and it wasn't makabel. The reason why it wasn't makabel is because it had a hole in it, and now you went ahead and stuffed that hole. So stuffing that hole is not going to make it into a keli. Halacha tezvav. Kumkumus shenikav. If you have a kumkumus, which is like a chaynik, a samavar, and vaso bezephys, and you went ahead and closed it with zephys, is tor. Why? She'eni yochel lekabel acham kitzein. A kumkumus is made for hot water, and even when you close it with a zephys, it's not enough to keep the hot water. V'chein klei hazephys v'ashayvo kiyetzeben. A keli which you cook zephys in, or you cook wax in, is teherin ve'ena b'chlal Keilim, because lepel, by stuffing with a zephys, it's not going to really keep it, because it'll fall apart. Halacha tezayin. Mashpech shel cheres. You have a funnel made out of cheres, shepokekoi b'zephys, that you went ahead and you stuffed it with zephys. Now you want to make it into a keli. So the din is eina mekabel tumah. She'ena zephys misime kli kibul. Zephys is not going to make a mashpech into a kli kibul. Even though we said before zephys could close up a hole, a zephys could close up a hole, but vice to is in a kli kibul, in a mashpech, the zephys won't last. Since the zephys is not really around the mashpech, it's like just stuffing up the hole, so that zephys will eventually fall out. Masha'inkin have a mashpech shel eitz shesosmei. If you have a mashpech, a funnel that's made out of wood, and then you went ahead and stuffed it up with, closed it, so made it into a keli, with zephys is arezik klikibul mistame. So it's brought down because lepel zephys is a min eitz, and therefore it sticks to eitz, and maybe it'll hold better zephys on eitz rather than zephys on a klicheres. Therefore on a klicheres it's not considered a keli, and in a kli eitz it is considered a keli. There's another difference between a cheres and another. We said before that if you stuff up a hole with Zephys, it's considered a good Keilim. Masha'inkin by a mashpech, so the Bartanura says, because when you had a cheres, which had a hole in it, so therefore it's already a rough edges over there by the hole. So therefore, because of the rough edges, the tar sticks more. Masha'inkin, when you have a mashpech, you have just a funnel, it was never broken. So the Zephys won't really stick to it, and therefore it's not considered a Keilim.